Hey, it's Jeff Hyman, your startup therapist, where we focus on the people part of startups. And I've got a wonderful guest today, Betsy Tilkemeier. Hey, Betsy.
Hello, Jeff. How are you?
It's great to see you.
Nice to see you, too.
So I'm going to introduce you real quick for those of our audience that may not be familiar with your work, but you've been at this game of talent management and executive search for many years. I won't say how many years.
Thank you.
But we're going to spend the next 15, 20 minutes really talking about the fundamentals of finding amazing talent for your company. And I know you've done so many searches over the years. I would guess, hundreds of searches probably?
Hundreds, yes.
So
yes.
You've seen this movie before. Betsy, you are co-founder and managing partner of Northline Partners. That's a boutique retained search firm based in Chicago, started about 5-6 years ago, correct?
Yes.
What I thought was really interesting is that you have this unique perspective because you've also prior worked at 3 of the top executive search firms in the world, Reynolds, Heidrick Struggles, and Korn Ferry.
Correct.
Which just gives you great perspective. As I understand it, your work tends to focus on private equity, VC, and other type of search work. Do you do all kinds of searches, CEO, CMO, etc.?
Yes, I do mostly CMO, Chief Commercial Officer, a lot of e-commerce, and yes, we do presidents and CEOs, mostly for private equity-backed, high-growth, consumer-oriented companies that are looking for competencies that they don't have.
Got
We're never filling an empty hole on an org chart.
As opposed to replacing.
As opposed to replacing.
Got it.
We will oftentimes be upgrading, but it's not, craft where they've, made a director of innovation because somebody has left. It's not the work we do. So
that's a really good place for us to start then, because so many times I'm asked by entrepreneurs and CEOs, how do I figure out what it is I'm looking for? Because this is a first time hire for me. It's our first head of sales, or it's our first head of marketing or CFO. So there's not a box on the org chart yet, other than just the concept of the position. Where do you start? When you work with one of your clients, how do you identify the need and kind of scope it out before you even start to look for that person?
Yes. Well, we do a lot of this, by the way. In fact, I would say 50% of my practice is exactly this. So what I first do is, first of all, I spend time with the CEO or founder or investor, whoever it is, to number one, understand what is the business objective? What are you trying to do with your business? And then you go back and figure out what competencies do you have and what do you not have to reach that goal? Because oftentimes founders will hire people in their likeness. We do not need to replicate what the founder brings.
Look, let me ask you a very specific question. You use the word competencies, which I hear thrown around a lot.
Yes.
For those that don't know, how do you define a competency that the business needs or that the role needs?
A competency is, say it's e-commerce. Does the person understand how to build digital engagement? This is a skill. This is an experience base that actually exists, not just taking somebody who, understands that you have to do e-commerce. This has to be somebody who understands how do you do customer acquisition, how do you do CRM, how do you do SEO, SEM, how do you actually build a competency in a company. And if customer acquisition is what you need to jumpstart the business, then you have to have somebody who is competent and who actually understands the discipline. These are disciplines.
Got it.
So that's what you look to hire. So we try to figure out where do you want to take the business and what do you need? What is probably what you need first, second, and third. And instead of going out and developing a position description that's rigid, we develop position descriptions that have a lot of flex in them. Even around the title, I will go out with a title, head of commercial.
Right.
That could be a marketing person, that could be a salesperson, that could be an e-commerce person, or that could be a combination of all of those. It makes the project harder, but that gets you the right result that the client needs.
Because it lets you cast a wider net?
Because we cast a much wider net, and we let the process of them seeing people that might fit in every one of those buckets determine which of them is the most important. And it's only when they see it, do they really understand what all of these competencies mean. And again, it's 3 times the work, but in the end, you hire them the person that's going to help them build their business, not what they think they need going into it.
So let's use the counter example. What is the wrong way to do it? You've described what you envision as the right way to do it. What mistake do you see people make in terms of defining the role or the spec?
Well, one of the things that I see as a mistake is that people just think, well, you can just hire a smart person and they'll figure it out. I only hire smart people. So that is the price of entry to the conversation. So you can assume that people are going to be smart, but they have to actually have the real competency in what you need to accomplish. And that's where a lot of people go wrong. They just think, well, I know a lot of really smart people because I worked at McKinsey and I worked at, these 3 CPG companies, but they might not have the actual skill and experience to draw on to be successful. So I think that's a place where people really get themselves in trouble. Also, hiring in your own likeness. You don't need another one of the founder. You need what the founder doesn't have.
Right.
And I think narrowly trying to focus the spec before you've actually gone out to the market.
To see what's out there, to see who's available.
What's out there.
Right.
But it's also, if it's a mature enough company, you probably are a little bit more sophisticated and can hone in on what you really need. So we see a hybrid. We start with a very broad spec, but we will go to something much more much more defined if the company is more mature, and if the leader that maybe we've brought in has already assessed the team that's there and is very specific about what competency they're missing.
Got
it. We've helped build the whole leadership team of Omaha Steaks, and when the president came in, he quickly identified a couple of competencies that he knew didn't exist. And what he didn't do is hire somebody that brought the same competencies as him. But as he has moved up in the organization and is now going to be the president, he now needs to backfill his skills. So it was the last kind of box that we checked,
right, versus
hiring somebody that can do the same thing as he could.
Got it.
That I saw as a very effective way to approach your talent.
As a leader, a business leader, CEO or a functional head engages in this process of hiring a key member of their team, what type of leader does well at identifying those competencies? What kind of self-awareness does it take? Or what kind of emotional intelligence does it take to figure this out?
I think it takes a lot, but you can't really teach it. So either somebody has it or they don't. And it's interesting, in the upfront discussions about doing a project for one of these kinds of sort of leaders who's maybe new in a role, they tend to spend more time thinking about sort of pulling the trigger on doing a search, which I actually find very helpful. It takes a lot of my time, but I actually have a much better sense as to how receptive they're really going to be to hiring the right kind of talent, to listening to us, to valuing our understanding of the marketplace. And probably to me, the most important thing to understand is context. To me, context is the most important thing about choosing a candidate based on both their competencies, but also the fit. Mm-hmm. And fit is critically important.
So let me really drill into that, because I think one of the challenges in this whole process of recruiting is how do you interview or assess fit, right? I get the competencies, the skills, we can kind of figure that out.
It's the harder part.
Sure. So but give us some practical understanding. If I'm a CEO hiring my first CFO or head of sales, how do I figure out, is this person a fit?
I think you have to partner with a recruiter who's experienced, because my experience and my ability to judge fit is based on 25 years of meeting people, understanding the cultures at companies at different periods of time, understanding what teams these people have been part of and what environments they have been successful in. If somebody's been successful at PepsiCo, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be successful at Kind Snacks. Right. It doesn't mean they won't, but you really have to understand what point in history were they at these companies and what was the culture that was rewarded.
So how do you do that? Let's say I'm partnering with a search consultant like yourself.
I do that by spending a lot of time with the candidates. I also do it by doing a lot of informal referencing. And my informal referencing is happening all day, every day with every single search I do. When I interview somebody who I like and respect and think that they've had some great accomplishments, I write in the margins of my interviews. I walk out of every interview with at least 10 or 15 names of people. Best boss. Who's the person that you promoted? Who's a person who was a diamond in the rough, who you came to the company and thought they're never going to make it, and you gave them the right kind of guidance and leadership and held them accountable.
And then you're calling those people along the way.
I am cultivating a list of thousands of people.
How do you get past the objection or issue I hear from people, which is, aside from how time consuming it is, I get that, about their comfort or discomfort of calling people without the explicit permission of the candidate, where it could, someone with loose lips could open up and they could be found out that they're looking or interviewing for a job.
I am very, very direct about that when you start a search with us. If you are using us, you have put that trust in us that we're going to do that work.
I mean, from the candidate's perspective, though.
No, I'll tell you. And we tell the client that they cannot go and do this digging, because the problem is you've got commentary out of context. This person's sisters, brothers, uncles, aunt might have worked for this person 15 years ago. And by the way, they were a problematic employee and this person had to fire them. So you're getting information about this candidate that has nothing to do with this job, that is not relevant. So we assure candidates that we've had that dialogue with the CEO or founder, whoever we're working with, and we hold them pretty accountable to that. But I think more importantly, they have to trust that we do that work. And, if I find out something about a candidate that sounds fishy, I tell the client, and I will pull an offer. We've done it before. Look, this is my reputation. All of my work comes from repeat business.
Give us some examples, no names, of fishy. So that's another question I get often.
I'll give you a really good example. Yeah. We were doing a search for a company in Michigan, a really, really big global company in the direct selling industry. I'm sure you can figure out who it is. And the candidate was really showing more and more signs of not having a flexible personality and maybe using the offer because he was so stuck on all of the details. It told us maybe this person isn't a fit for an entrepreneurial company. But he said one thing that gave me the red flag, that he was using this to get a counteroffer from his current company. Mm-hmm. We pulled the offer, and it was my suggestion to the client to pull the offer. The client didn't say to me, I said, you know what, we should pull this offer. And we did. And we ended up hiring somebody who's still there today, who was a better fit.
So that was a fit issue, not a ethics or integrity issue.
Not an ethics or integrity issue. But you know what? You do come across that too. Yeah. But by the time you're at the offer stage, we've done enough due diligence to know that this person's isn't going to have major ethical issues.
Got it. Well, what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see executives make when it comes to hiring? You mentioned a big one before, which was not taking the time to define competencies. What are some other 2 or 3 best practices or alternatively mistakes that you see people make?
Well, I think, again, hiring their buddies because they're smart. Yeah. And that happens all the time. Yep. When I do a search for a company that may be in the $50 to $100 million range, and I'm doing the first major upgrade of outside talent, it's remarkable what the talent looks like that's in the company. Right. And the client has oftentimes done the search a little bit on their own. And then I asked to see, well, who have you talked to that you didn't? And I'm astounded by who they might have been considering. Right. Again, crazy smart people with degrees from MIT and Stanford and Harvard.
Right. But they're not going to be a fit for the situation.
Not right for the job that needs to be done. So I think that's a big deal. Look, in today's age, you have to be understanding of the fact that people don't move for a lateral. I get that, you can't, a lot of these companies don't have a ton of money, but top talent costs money. And the most modern companies these days are offering equity. I just did a huge equity study for 2 of my clients, just helping them understand that if you want this caliber of talent from those types of companies, the equity matters.
So you made a very interesting observation. Talent, let's say rock stars, A players, top X%, don't move for laterals.
No.
So what does a founder or CEO do if she's hiring her first head of marketing, her chief marketing officer, and she wants someone who's been there and done it before, who's been a chief marketing officer? Isn't that a lateral? And if so, how do I? And I can only pay so much. Let's be realistic. I'm a startup company.
Yeah.
I can't outspend these bigger companies or sexier companies. How do I convince, other than hiring a search firm who is quite compelling on the phone, how do I convince talent to even consider that kind of lateral?
Well, I think you've got to hire a search firm also, you're right, that is compelling. But what I generally do is I show the client a range so that they can see perhaps, and we agree to this at the outset. Let me show you a range. You think you want to pay $200, but I'm telling you probably need to pay $250 to $275 in a base. Let me show you what that looks like, and let me show you what the $200 looks like. And if in the end you can only pay $200, you have to understand that that's what you're going to get. It doesn't mean you're compromising. It means you are hiring for what you can afford. Oftentimes, though, they will move into and realize that they get a lot more value from a more senior or a more seasoned executive, because what I think is also critically important is that when you're hiring somebody on your leadership team and you are an earlier stage company, there is no way you can afford to hire somebody who just does marketing.
Right.
You have to hire somebody who can flex across the organization.
Spend more on fewer people.
On fewer people. And I'm not saying the marketing person is in charge of supply chain or operations or finance or quality, but a chief marketing officer for the companies that I do work for needs to have a point of view and needs to be able to contribute to any discussion around any of those subject matters. They need to be able to flex this way and also have a deep understanding of their specific functional competency.
Let's say I'm looking for a mid-level person, so I don't have the time or budget for a search firm. I'm doing it myself. How many candidates, in your experience, should I look at to feel like I've seen that range of quote-unquote what's out there? How many candidates need to go in the top of the funnel to make sure I get one rock star out the bottom?
Yeah, I think it's a really tough question to ask because it depends on how you're doing it. I think that companies that try to do this on their own and are only responding to incoming. Incoming is not who we're looking for. If you've got somebody who's helping you and who is doing the outgoing outreach and then culling this down, it's a much smaller number because you're actually going after people you want.
Targeted.
It's
specific people. But so let's say we're doing that with it.
Say we're doing targeted.
Yeah. Is it 5 people I need to talk to? 25? 100?
I think it's unreasonable to talk to over 15.
Okay.
But you should probably meet at least 5 to 10. I think if your person doing the outreach has done a sufficient job with the screening.
So the hiring manager should meet 5 to 10 in person.
Yes.
Presumably these are 5 to 10 people that have raised their hand and said, yes, I'm interested in the discussion.
Absolutely. And they've been screened by somebody that has, look, when we do a search these days, and this is not an exaggeration, I don't do a single search these days where the outreach is less than 300 to 400 people these days. Because
is that just because of how tight the job market is right now?
Not necessarily how tight, but we're looking generally for people who aren't doing the exact job in one place. Like I'm not bringing the head of marketing from Under Armour to be the head of marketing to Nike.
Sure.
It's not always apples to apples. So people come from very unique places that you might not have thought at all to be right. So you've got to cast a pretty wide net. But that's my job. That doesn't mean my client's seeing that many people. Yeah. So we cull it down and cull it down and cull it down and, have, weekly calls to better understand, does this resonate? Does this make sense? This person could be right, because that's how the client makes an informed decision. And if somebody is internally doing this, that's what they should be doing for their hiring manager as well. Yeah. Making sure they understand the universe in which this person has looked for this person to make a decision that these are ones they should see and why. In
the last 2 minutes, one last question. What do you do if internally people can't agree on who the best choice is or the best candidate? Maybe we've seen so many that are so great, high class. It's a high class problem. and the hiring manager and the folks that have interviewed can't agree. It's down to 2 people. How do you advise people to go through that process of making a decision?
Well, we'll oftentimes put together a grid and literally rate it A, B, C, or 1, 2, 3, or green light, red light. It doesn't really matter. And write down, what is the most important criteria and kind of measure them, so this is 20%, this is 17, this is 15. I mean, it sounds a little scientific. It's not quite that scientific.
Right.
That generally it becomes pretty clear, like, well, wait a minute, the piece that we've talked about the most, this person has the most.
So you're weighting the criteria.
So we're weighting the criteria.
Yep.
But I will also say this doesn't happen that often. At least it doesn't for me, because I'm not dealing with big corporate where you've got recruiters and HR and hiring managers and peers, all these people weighing in. I generally have a pretty small group of people making the decision. It's generally the CEO and the investors. And
well, what happens if they can't agree? Let's say the CEO is hiring, a CFO, and she feels candidate A and the board, for whatever reason, feels candidate B. Who should make the final call? The board is responsible for governing.
It depends on what the criteria is. If the person who is the most competent to do the job is a terrible fit with the CEO, then that's a bad choice.
Yeah.
If the person who is a little less competent is a fantastic fit for the CEO and perhaps can fill some of the gaps with outside resources or somebody, that's a much better hire.
So you err on the side of fit then?
These days, yes.
Yeah, all else being equal.
They have to have both. Look, somebody who's really competent, who's not a good fit, is a terrible hire.
Sure.
Somebody who is 98% competent and a fantastic
right,
fit.
I just meant on the margin. On the margin, fit gets the edge.
For my clients, fit trumps.
Great.
But it's 51-49.
Great.
It's not like we're forgoing competency.
Got it. This is very helpful. How can people learn more about Northline or get in touch with you, Betsy?
You can call me at Northline. My number is 847-386-7190. My email is the letter B, like Betsy, Tilk, Tilk, at northlinepartners with an S.com. And I'd love to hear from anybody and help any company that's looking to grow their business.
Betsy, fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time and sharing this with us.
Terrific. Thanks, Jeff. Good to see you.
Take care.